Tropane alkaloids, plant toxins that kill. It's Uganda, March 2019. 5 people are dead, hundreds more are in hospital. The cause is a deadly foodborne illness. Investigators discovered that the food source is super cereal, a nutrient-dense fortified soy and corn product distributed by the World Food Programme that is used to combat malnutrition among vulnerable populations in developing countries. The World Food Programme suspends deliveries of super cereal worldwide, leaving tens of thousands of people without enough nutrition. They call on the expertise of scientists from Queens University Belfast, QUB, who discovered that the super cereal contained the DNA of jimsonweed, Datura stramonium, a plant that is in the poisonous nightshade family. Jimsonweed seeds contain tropane alkaloids, a deadly plant toxin. Tropane alkaloids are a class of chemical compound which includes the chemicals atropine and scopolamine, the tropane alkaloids most commonly found in foods. They are relatively heat stable and can survive cooking processes. And I'm about to read a quote from the Tropane Alkaloids in Food Poisoning Incidents peer-reviewed paper, and there is a link, of course, in the email. So here's the quote. A large number of wild and cultured plants produce secondary metabolites that can be toxic to humans and animals. Poisonings of humans by tropane alkaloids occur as unintended ingestions, contamination, mislabeling, 13 reports, mistaken identity, 11 reports, or by intended ingestions, overdoses, 9 reports. Contamination of food occurs when toxic plant parts are accidentally mixed with edible plants during harvest or processing. Concentrations are usually highest in roots and seeds. Intended ingestions can be the result of consumption for recreational purposes, that would be hallucinogenic effects, or for medical properties, e.g. treatment of arthritis, use as anaesthetic, or homicides and suicides. The toxic doses are often not clear due to the lack of analytical data in the cases reported. Human foods that potentially contain tropane alkaloids are herbal teas, herbal preparations, blue or black berries, and edible flowers. Contamination has also been found in beans, buckwheat, soybean, and linseed. How did the toxin end up in super cereal, a product made from soy and maize? Queens University has one of the world's leading food fraud research groups. To discover how jimsonweed got into the food product, they started by mapping its supply chain. They traced the contaminated batch of food right back to its place of origin, the country of Turkey where the food was made. And there they found the source of the contamination. Jimsonweed is an invasive species that can grow among crops. The seed had accidentally entered the soy supply chain. It seemed that just one batch of super cereal was affected. The source had been identified, the contaminated batch had been withdrawn from distribution. Problem solved. But it wasn't over yet. 5 months after the first food poisoning outbreak, a second outbreak occurred in a completely different part of Uganda. The people who got sick had also consumed super cereal, but from a completely different supply chain from a completely different source. How could that happen? Food from the contaminated batch had been withdrawn. It should have been destroyed, never to be eaten by anyone else. The weird thing is, when the Queen's University scientists tested the second lot of super cereal, their analyses showed it had an identical chemical fingerprint to the food that caused the first outbreak. The researchers concluded that the second outbreak was caused by cereal from the same batch as the first. This shouldn't have happened. Food from the contaminated batch had been withdrawn. Food fraud as well? QUB researchers suspected foul play. They suspect that batch identifiers on the bags of super cereal were altered, and documents accompanying the food were forged or faked to make it seem like it was from a different, clean batch. If these allegations prove correct, this is an example of food fraud as well as food poisoning from tropane alkaloids. At the very least, it was a horrible mix-up with batch numbers. Other cases. In July 2022, a number of brands of corn chips were withdrawn and recalled in Europe due to tropane alkaloid contamination. It is not known if any people were harmed. Whole cumin seeds, teas, and herbal infusions have been contaminated with tropane alkaloids. Spinach leaves have been inadvertently mixed with leaves from Datura species, leading to poisoning, according to this source. The link is in the email. Preventing tropane alkaloid contamination. Contamination prevention needs to happen at the farm and grain processing stages of food production. Ugandan scientists who investigated the 2019 outbreak said that jimsonweed favours growth in fields of leguminous crops, that would include soybeans, and that physically jimsonweed seeds are similar to some varieties of soy seeds in colour and size, making it possibly difficult to separate the two during processing. Farmers need to keep toxin-containing weeds away from crops, including grain and leafy crops. Grain handlers must use separation techniques that are effective against contamination with seeds and leaves that could contain tropane alkaloids. Food manufacturers need to ensure that their incoming grain products have been subject to separation activities that prevent seed and leaf contamination in the grains. This should be part of vendor risk assessment processes. In the case of super cereal manufacturing, I read somewhere, and I'm so sorry I can't locate the source any longer, that the facility responsible for manufacturing the jimsonweed contaminated products for the World Food Programme had serious defects in the design and implementation of its quality management system. It was suggested that incoming soy was not subject to any screening or separation activities, and those would have reduced the amount of contamination of seed in the soy. A properly designed and implemented system would have prevented the contamination and provided accurate batch identification on the sacks of food. For at-risk foods and ingredients, such as grains, soybeans, teas and herbs, monitoring for the presence of tropane alkaloids should be considered. And as always, there is a link to all of the sources, apart from that one I couldn't remember, in today's email.